Fearless and truthful.
Provocative and controversial.
We say it like it really is.
With dignity and respect.
Committed to free speech and common sense.
Upbeat and entertaining.
Straight talking and direct.
We may agitate each other and you.
Thought-provoking, provocative and controversial. Hello and welcome to The Pledge. Now, there have been plenty of scary things around this week. Children dressed as witches and ghouls for Halloween. The nights drawing in after the clocks went back. Philip Hammond trying to crack jokes. But nothing compares to the fright I experienced just now when I walked into our green room and saw this lot without any makeup on. Coming up, Greg has some questions for Spreadsheet Phil. Carol thinks British jihadi widows shouldn't be allowed home. Nick says eat my shorts. And June thinks there's a bit of sparkle in the royal family. But first up, it's me. Now, to a more serious matter, as Donald Trump visited the synagogue where 11 American Jews were killed, protesters accused him of encouraging white supremacist attackers like suspect Robert Dowers. Playing pin the tail on the donkey after a tragic terrorist attack is sadly a regular political sport. Depending on perspectives, no one is safe. Democrats are tagged for ignoring grievances, the media for whipping up anger, and outrageously, the Pittsburgh Jewish community themselves for being pro-immigration. This can all quickly become too shrill. Trump's daughter and son-in-law are, after all, Jewish too. And Robert Dowers is no fan of the president. But just days after pipe bombs were sent to CNN's offices, Mr. Trump once again branded media as the enemy of the people. To speak in such tones immediately after bombs were sent to the media is totally irresponsible. If we are all held hostage to the balmy end of our political leanings, and every political outlook has them, then none of us had better say anything at all. But we are directly responsible for our own inflammatory language, and it is here that Mr. Trump keeps failing.
But Maajid, you're not suggesting there's a direct relationship between the Trump rhetoric and these events in the United States, eh?
No, of course not. I mean, that's why my introduction was so caveated. As I said, if we're all held hostage to the balmy ends of our political leanings, then we can't even speak. What I am suggesting, though, is what we are directly accountable for is our own inflammatory language on its own terms. And so, though there's obviously no connection between the pipe bomb sent to CNN and the president directly, there's even less of a connection with the synagogue attack and the president. However, it still is irresponsible to create a climate in which hostility can, I imagine, encourage or facilitate or produce those sorts of attackers. And so my suggestion, of course, is just to be a bit careful when describing people as the enemy of the people. Of course, enemies involve war, which involves fighting.
But that's how he got elected.
Of course it is.
He got elected by using that sort of language.
Greg is being interestingly contrarian. I imagine you agree with me secretly, Greg, that we should be careful about how we speak to people and about people.
Well, I think the tone of language is important and we should be careful. But I think it's too big a jump to say the tone of language like his lead. I mean, there's always been nutters in America. Of course. As in most countries, but particularly in America.
Not in the White House like this.
I'm not accusing Mr. Trump of being a nutter. I'd accuse him of all sorts of things, but I'm not sure he's a nutter. But therefore...
I think she was.
Yeah, I'm accusing him of that.
Well, you think he is responsible then?
Yeah.
Well, you've got to be responsible for your language, surely.
Totally. And I'd like to... Let me show a clip and I'll tell you why I do think that there is a clear direct link.
I love the old days. You know what they used to do to guys like that when they were in a place like this? They'd be carried out on a stretcher, folks. Like to punch them in the face, I'll tell you. They're bringing drugs, they're bringing crime, they're rapists, and some, I assume, are good people. And their agenda is to elect crooked Hillary Clinton. If she gets to pick her judges, nothing you can do, folks. Although the Second Amendment people, maybe there is, I don't know. I thought it was very, very appropriate. He was swinging, he was hitting people, and the audience hit back. And that's what we need, a little bit more of. Honestly, she should be locked up. Should be.
And I just want to say a couple of things and then I'll hand over to both.
Until your voice gives away.
Yeah, Nick and Carol, who are looking at me like, is she mad? Couple of things. So in the case of the synagogue shooter, his final tweet before he went and murdered those 11 people and injured so many was that he was going to specifically attack that synagogue because of their stance on immigration, and particularly because Muslims, and particularly to Hayas. And the head of Hayas said, and I thought he put it so brilliantly, he said, hateful language often leads to hateful acts. And what I will say, Maajid, is at the end of the day, with all of the hysteria that Trump was whipping up over that so-called caravan, we are not surprised that this happened this week in America. The other piece I would add is where the pipe bomber is concerned. The people that pipe bomber attacked are people that have actually been called out by Donald Trump as enemies. Yeah. And can I just pick up one last thing and then I'll hand over a picture of the pipe bomber's van. Well, what else?
Okay.
I've got nothing else to say.
Let me take you on that because I just want to read you a tweet. And this is from a conservative commentator called Ben Shapiro. And he says, crazy person attacks Republican Congresspeople, blame the crazy. Crazy person sends bombs to Democrats, blame the Republicans. And he was talking about last year, you might remember, when it was a Bernie Sanders supporter burst into the baseball practice with a gun and started firing at Republican congressmen. So nobody blamed Bernie Sanders back then. And while Robert Bowers is responsible for the deaths of those 11 people, nobody else, he's a crazy. But I do concede that because of Trump, there is a new extremism in politics that wasn't there before. There is a lot more violence and anger. But I think it's on both sides of the aisle, because although we were talking about Maxine Waters being one of the... She's one of the Democrats that got the pipe bomb. Remember what she said about people, just quite recently. She said that anyone who was in Trump's administration, if they walk into a bar or a restaurant or a gas station, people have to crowd around them and force them out and tell them they're not welcome. That's inflammatory language too. And I just think, I think it's happening on both sides.
So do we agree then responsibility stops with the person using the inflammatory language, and the problem is their inflammatory language, even though obviously the terrorist and the killer
leaders
is
as well,
separate.
and I think people in charge of political parties on both sides, people listen to what leaders say, and this is the problem.
Of course.
And the thing about Trump's tweets, the violent tweets, the accusation is there that it's what he is saying is inflaming people who might start believing.
Do you remember when he spoke to the police in New York and he said a bit more brutality is needed to arrest people? Anyway, Nick wants to come in. Go on, Nick.
Just to challenge June, because look, he has said some intemperate things, but I don't think we can lay the actions, what happened at the synagogue at Pittsburgh at the president's door.
We can say he's created the environment that made it more likely.
Well, then when Islamist terrorists totally misrepresent their faith and start blowing people up, we don't blame sane people don't blame Islam or the Prophet Muhammad. It's people misinterpreting.
Hold on. False comparison. We do blame the imams that are actually whipping them up and creating that rhetoric.
But it's a misinterpretation.
You do.
I mean, of course, Greg's right. President Trump has not added to civility in his country or indeed the entire world. The language is much, much more brutal. But to get to the door of the synagogue, I just can't go that far down the path.
So hold on, can I just on that analogy, what I do know personally is that if an Islamist preacher in a mosque is saying gays deserve to die in an ideal caliphate, and then ISIS are throwing them off buildings, we in the media do say that Islamist is a fanatic and is creating a hostile environment for gays and creating homophobia.
Exactly.
So where there's a direct language link to an atrocity, we don't say they're responsible for murder.
Trump didn't say shoot the Jews.
No, but he did. No, but when I'm talking about pipe bombs and the enemy of the... When you say media are the enemy of the people, or when you go into New York...
Oh, that's awful.
And when you're addressing police and you say a bit more brutality is needed to arrest people, you've got to be held accountable for the language. If you're president of the United States...
But this guy, this nutter, Robert Bowers, he actually, he was berating Trump by saying that he hadn't done enough about the, quote, infestation of Jews.
What is interesting about Trump is having created this language, really, in politics in a way that we haven't seen for many decades. Is there any way back from it? Or is that the way that the political discourse continues?
It's a good point.
It's hard to think of going back to Obama days, isn't it? It's hard to think about going back to that.
Well, you mentioned Obama for balance. We better go to the White House now. Sorry to interrupt, Carol, but let's hear what the White House press secretary, Sarah Huckabee Sanders, said quite soon after the attack.
Look, there's a big difference between comments made and actions taken. The president is certainly not responsible for sending suspicious packages to someone, no more than Bernie Sanders was responsible for a supporter of his shooting up a Republican baseball field practice last year. The idea that this is at the hands of the president is absolutely ridiculous.
And I think, Carol, that responds to the tweet that you read a few moments ago. It's exactly the same theme.
It is. And also I think that, Trump's problem is that whereas Obama was a national consoler, if there was some terrible tragedy happening, he was fantastic at that.
Yeah.
But I think with Trump's problem is
Which
that
has its downsides, by the way.
Yeah, but with Trump, he can't convey empathy or compassion. He can't do that. It sounds fake with him, and he just can't do it.
Before we do, just to see, Trump's deployed a very clever linguistic technique when he speaks as well, to sometimes be able to have a level of plausible deniability when it comes to some of this stuff. Let's just watch this fascinating take by somebody who's an expert on the matter.
Trump has a habit of announcing that he's not going to say something while he's actually saying it.
So I refuse to say that I cannot stand her screaming into the microphone all the time.
This rhetorical device is called apophasis. It lets Trump plant an idea in people's heads without taking any responsibility for what he's saying.
Now, I won't say it was because of me, but it was, okay? I won't do it. I was going to say they're full of but I won't say that. No, it's true. It's true. I won't say it.
This mischievous strategy allows Trump to present himself as a lovable rogue.
Right, so that's behavioural psychologist Dr. Peter Collins.
Imagine you and I now have got to do this on LBC.
I'm just going to start doing that to all my corners. I'm not saying you're dumb. I mean, I would have said you're dumb, but I'm not going to say you're dumb.
It's very clever, though. It's a very clever piece of rhetoric.
But his problem is as well, isn't it, that the media are totally against him. Whatever he says, whatever he
Fox
does,
News isn't.
is never. Well, no, but CNN is.
Yeah, CNN is.
The media and the papers are certainly against him. So even when he did express revulsion at these attacks in the synagogue, he's complaining that they're not
went to Pittsburgh even though they didn't want him
Yeah,
there.
but he had
so
to.
he doesn't really care what they do.
But he had to.
He doesn't. They said don't come.
Yeah, he does.
President.
If you're the president, you've got to go.
Between a rock and a hard place.